Hi and welcome to the Unquendor Guitars workshop and part 2 in the video series where I work on my single cut guitar model, and today I'm going to continue and work on this neck. So after routing the truss rod channel and getting the main shape of this neck done in the previous episode, first thing I have to do today is determine and cut out the headstock break angle. With this design for the headstock, drawing out the required break angle can be a bit tricky due to the curvature of the headstock. It's very hard to get an accurate line between where the nut is going to end, so the backside of the nut, and the tip of the headstock. And I came up with a little trick I wanted to share with you, how you can accurately draw out the required headstock break angle. So to get the correct break angle, and I'm aiming for around 12 degrees break angle, I've measured the length of my headstock starting at the back of the nut, and that's 150 millimeters for me. So I'm going to draw a line 150 millimeters long. And I made two extra marks, one at 80 millimeters from the top and one on 123 millimeters. So I'm going to draw these out as well. 123 millimeters. And using my protractor, I'm going to draw some lines perpendicular to the initial line. And I'm going to draw in my break angle. Approximately 12 degrees. And I'm going to connect this line to this line. And lengthen this line a little. I'm going to measure this line. And it's 26 millimeters in my case, and I can do the same right here at the end of the headstock. 26 millimeters, and I can measure the second line as well. That's 12, so that's this line. It's 12 millimeters. And the last section just under 5. And now on my headstock I can connect three marks together, and I have to bend my ruler just a little. And this is my break angle. To get this line to go over this edge and through this bend, I'm going to use a little trick involving masking tape, and I've showed this already in a previous video. If you put down masking tape as parallel as you can get it, and it's a bit hard due to the curvature of the headstock, but if you put down your masking tape as straight as possible and just ease it over the edge and through the curvature. This continues to be a straight line. As you can see, I'm very close to the end of the nut. So now I can use the masking tape as a reference for my bandsaw, and I know if I cut along the masking tape, I should be relatively close to the required headstock break angle, and I can use a plane to tidy up the cut. So, the tricky part about doing this cut is keeping your nut line as parallel as possible to your bandsaw blade. With my other neckstock shape, I designed my headstock in such a way that when it's resting on a flat surface, it's perpendicular to that surface, so in my case parallel to the bandsaw blade. But in this case I've reattached one of the offcuts from the neck blank to the neck again, using just a couple of pieces of masking tape, and this should give me, as close as I can get it, a parallel cut of my bandsaw to the nut line. So yeah, hopefully this works out okay. So let's start cutting. So the cut went well, and now I can use my hand plane just to finalize the angle and get a nice and even surface. So I'm going to clamp it in my vise, and I'm trying to keep this horizontal, and now I can start planing. Straight after planing the headstock, I always like to drill the truss rod access hole straight away. Yeah, I think it's a pain in the, you know where, to do this when the truss rod is installed, because your drill is going to hit the end of the truss rod. And now I can see what I'm doing, and there's, even when things go wrong, I have a possibility to fix a mistake. So take a cordless drill, very long drill bit, and just place it in the groove I've routed and drill the hole. And of course check if the hole is accurate enough. Oh, and your Allen key can reach the truss rod, and there's no problem at all. Another job done. So the next step in my building process is start working on the fretboard, and I've got this beautiful piece of ebony, and I like my ebony to have a little coloring in it, or a lot of coloring in this case. A beautiful piece of ebony. Yeah, the next step is to get it down to thickness, and I'm aiming for in between 6.5 to 7 millimeters of thickness. So I'm going to plane it down using my hand planes, and then do the final sanding with my spindle sander trick, using the fence of my router table and my spindle sander to get to the final thickness and have a nice and even fretboard. So that's what I'm going to do next, but first, of course, have a cup of coffee. So to help me plane down the fretboard, I've stuck it to a big piece of mahogany, of which I know is dead flat, so I can clamp it to the workbench using just a couple of bench dogs. And I'm going to use my number 7 plane to get the fretboard as close to the final thickness as I can before I take it over to my spindle sander. So I've set up my Triton oscillating spindle sander to act as a thickness sander by adding the fence of my router table with just 2 clamps. I clamped it to the table of this spindle sander. I made sure it's absolutely perpendicular or square to the table. And now I can make several small passes feeding my fretboard through the spindle sander to get it to the final thickness. Now I've got my fretboard down to the required thickness of about 6.3 millimeters or a quarter of an inch. And now I can use my fret slotting jig to start cutting all the fret slots. So I've attached the fretboard to the template that comes with my fret slotting jig, and I also added 2 toggle clamps to the jig to hold the fretboard in place while cutting the fret slots. So yeah, there's only 24 fret slots to cut, so yeah, I better get started. Alright, the final slot is in, and this is one of the jobs I like the least about the entire build. Yeah, I don't enjoy cutting these fret slots, but yeah, it's a job that has to be done, so I'm glad this one's over. So after cutting the fret slots, I cut off the axis on each end of the fretboard, so at the nut line and where the 25th fret should be. And off camera I already clamped down the fretboard to the neck and made sure it's aligned properly, so the nut line is perpendicular to the center line of the neck. And this always takes me a while, so I did it off camera, so not to bore you guys with me trying to align the fretboard to the neck. So it's aligned, and now I'm going to drill 2 little holes, one at the 2nd fret, so in the fret slot, and I think one in the 23rd fret slot, just to insert a toothpick as a guide pin that helps me to reposition the fretboard once the glue is on. So yeah, let's glue this fretboard to the neck plane. To clamp down the fretboard to the neck, I always like to use a couple of strips of foam rubber, and I believe this helps me to spread the pressure from the clamps. And of course I'm going to use a clamping caul. It's aligned on top of the neck, and just use a couple of clamps . You don't need a lot of pressure, I believe. You spread some clamps evenly. Yeah, a nice amount of squeeze out, which I'm going to remove. Straight away. So now there's nothing else to do than to let it dry overnight, and tomorrow I can cut off the overhang of the fretboard on the bandsaw and use the router table to trim the fretboard flush with the neck. And then yeah, then it's almost time to start shaping the neck, so see you in a moment. So it's the next day. The glue has cured for almost 24 hours now, so I can remove the clamps, use the bandsaw to trim off the excess on the sides of the fretboard, and yeah, use my router table to get the fretboard nice and flush with the neck. So the fretboard is on and it's nice and flush with the rest of the neck, and I hope it showed up on camera that I used the bandsaw to trim as close to the neck as I dared, so the router table had the least amount of material to remove, just to prevent tear outs and all kinds of crazy things happening to the fretboard, and all went well, so I'm very pleased. The next step is to start carving the neck shape. But unfortunately that will be in the next video. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please leave a like. I really appreciate it if you did. If you're new to my channel and you don't want to miss out on any of my content, please subscribe. And if you have any questions or topics you want me to address in an upcoming video, please leave it in the comment section down below. Yeah, and I hope to see you all in the next video. But until then, have a nice week.